Baby, I'm playing on you tonight. Hunt you down, eat you alive. Just like animals, animals like animals.
Hey there, I'm Dave.
And I'm Emile.
And so Emile, what are we going to talk about today?
So at this point, we've gone through the hydration process to create our configuration manager server, domain controller, domain, MDT server, as well as 4 workstations. If we were to go into the console right now, we really don't have much to work with. So what we're going to do now is take you through the steps to do some base configuration inside of Configuration Manager and get it to a point where we can utilize some more of your scripts.
So how long do you think it'll roughly take us for the post-configuration steps? Maybe 10 minutes or so?
Yeah, 10 tops, I think.
Okay, and so what are some of the things that we're going to have to do? We might have to configure some of the base reporting services. I think we'll have to configure some of the firewall settings. And was there anything else that we're going to go through and configure?
We've got to get some permissions straightened out so that the account that we're going to use to actually deploy our configuration manager clients are added to local administrators on the workstations.
Awesome, so let's jump right into our demo here.
Okay, so now we're into the Configuration Manager console. The first thing that we're going to do before we get too deeply involved here is to get the reporting services point configured. We're going to use that later just to run some reports. So Dave, let's go ahead.
All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to launch our Configuration Manager console. So we've already hydrated the lab and we validated this is working and everything's kind of healthy inside the environment. So before we can do much in here, we've got to do some basic post-configuration tasks that aren't really handled by hydration. And so we could potentially hydrate these steps as well, but there's so few of them that we're just not going to worry about it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to click in the Configuration Manager console, and we're going to click on the administration tab here to move into the administration workspace. And then what we want to do is we want to click on Site Configuration. And then what we want to do is we want to take and we want to select sites. Once we've selected sites, we can see that we've got our primary site here, PS1. We're just going to right click on the primary site, PS1. And what we're going to do is we're going to click on Add Site System Roles. This sometimes takes a moment to open, which is perfectly normal. And then all that we're going to do here is we're just going to accept all of the defaults and we're just going to choose the reporting services option here. So we'll just click next. We don't have to worry about proxy settings. And then the role that we want here is just the reporting services point. So we'll select reporting services point, go ahead and click next. Now we have to take and type in an account that's going to be required for this. Okay, so let's just go ahead and add our account in here. And what we have to do is we're actually going to have to type in a new account here because we don't have any accounts that exist. And this is not actually the creation of an account on the system. We just have to type in an existing Active Directory account that we're going to be using really as the service account for our reporting services. And you'll do this a lot through Configuration Manager. And once we've actually typed in this account once, if we wanted to reuse it again, we could simply just go through and say use an existing account in that previous dialog box. So what we'll do here is we'll just type the name of the account here. So we can either type it or we can browse for it. So I think what we'll do is we'll just maybe browse for the account. It's just going to search inside of ViaMonstra. And what we'll do here is we'll just take and we'll type the name. So for the lab and the hydration that what we've got, is most of our accounts are created very simple. So they're just CM and then underscore reporting services. So we just have SR.
I figure that in Swedish it's got to be backwards, and
yeah.
That's why it's SR instead of RS. But this account was created during Johan's hydration script. Effectively, for the reporting services account itself, it's just a straight user account. Any permissions that need to be configured for that account are actually done in this step right here.
Now we'll just simply click the verify checkbox here, and it says it's successfully verified. Okay, so now we'll just go ahead and click next here. And we'll finish the installation of reporting services.
So what's the name of our blog site, Dave?
So our blog site is called www.checkyourlogs.net, or Emile likes to use .com, but it's Check Your Logs is our blog site.
So to that, we really love Configuration Manager because there's logs for pretty much everything. So if we go inside of our D drive here into our Microsoft Configuration Manager folder, there is a logs directory, and we can actually watch the process of reporting services be created through these log files. And ultimately, there's 3 log files that we want to reference here. It's SRS-RP setup, SRS-RP MSI, and the SRS-RP log file.
So Emile, in Configuration Manager, you're mentioning the log files there. These are really handy because in the GUI for what we see in Configuration Manager, although things don't look like they're actually happening, they are happening behind the scenes. So knowing and understanding your log files in Configuration Manager is probably one of the most important skill sets that we have. Now, when it comes time to actually viewing log files, which tool would we use for viewing log files?
It's a tool that's actually included with Configuration Manager. It's called CM Trace. From the installation directory, the C program files Microsoft Configuration Manager folder, there's a subfolder there called Tools. Inside of that folder, you'll find the CM Trace tool.
Go.
So Dave and I love the CM Trace tool so much that we don't just use it for Configuration Manager, but we use it for pretty much any log file that we open up these days. There's lots of really neat little features inside this tool, like it'll automatically highlight lines that have the word fail in it or the word warning. You can merge multiple log files into the same view. One of the other cool things that I like is the lookup feature. You can press Control-L while you're inside of CM Trace and type in any Microsoft error code that you could possibly find, and it'll come back and tell you what that error code means.
Perfect. And so one of the ways to use this utility as well is you can just open it and launch it on your server for the first time. It'll ask you if you want to do a default association, and you can say yes. And there's also registry key change that you can make to default this when you're building your server. So I'll just go ahead and say yes here. And then all that you have to do from this point forward is just go ahead and open the log file. And where we're going to find the log file here that we're going to look at initially is the one we used for the installation of reporting services. So which log file did we want to open here, Emile?
srsrp.log.
Okay, and where are most of the default Config Manager log files stored?
Under the installation directory, so typically that's C or D, program files, then Microsoft Configuration Manager. There's a subfolder in there called logs.
Okay, awesome. And so which one did we want to look up again here? We wanted to look up the setup log, right?
Yeah, srsrp.log.
srsrp. And then there's another one in here for setup as well. So most of these things, when you're actually running the setup of the additional roles in Configuration Manager, they will have an associated setup log. And what you want to make sure of is at the very bottom is that the setup has completed successfully. So you see this line right here where it says installation completed successfully, or installation was successful in this case. This is what we're really looking for. So whenever you're working in Configuration Manager and it feels like maybe something isn't working properly or something is just not behaving the way that it should, it's really important to come back to these back-end server-side log files. And as you evolve and you start building your skill set with Configuration Manager, you're going to start to learn by heart what these individual log files do. So this is just one kind of quick little example. So that being said, we could successfully assume that, you know, our reporting services has installed here properly.
Okay, awesome. So with our reporting services installed, the next thing that we need to do is we need to get some real good data sucked into Configuration Manager. Stuff like user accounts, computer accounts, the Active Directory sites and or subnets that are out in our enterprise. Where are we going to go for that?
So this is something called discovery methods inside of Configuration Manager. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on Hierarchy and Configuration, and we're going to come down to this object here called discovery methods. And which discovery methods do we typically configure or not configure? Because there's some dangers in configuring these incorrectly. Right, Emile?
Absolutely. The first one that we're going to want to go for is Active Directory Forest Discovery. And this one is new to Configuration Manager 2012. What this is going to do is it's automatically going to create boundaries for us based upon the information that's in Active Directory sites and services. So that's really important, because if your Active Directory sites and services has not been built properly or is not complete, you're going to get erroneous information in here.
Okay, so for the purposes of the lab, are we okay enabling this?
Oh, absolutely. Our hydration did all that for us.
Okay, and did we want to create IP ranges as well for the lab?
No, we're not going to. We know that what's in there is correct. I like to go with sites when I can because it keeps things really, really easy to manage down the road. So let's just go with site boundaries for now.
Okay, perfect. And we can see that this is going to run on a schedule here, and by default, it's looking like it's gonna run every 1 week. Do we typically change this in the lab environment while we're taking and working and building stuff?
In the lab, most definitely, because we will often make a lot of hierarchical changes that don't typically happen in your regular production environment. Inside of our lab, we may turn this down to happen once every 3-4 hours because we have a really, really small environment. In your production, I mean, you could have hundreds of sites, so you may not necessarily want this to run. Once your sites, your subnets have been entered into sites and services, what's there is there. So we don't really need to process changes that often. We could even turn this down to once a month.
Okay, perfect. So for the purposes of our lab here, I'm just going to leave this at 3 hours then. So we'll go ahead and we'll click apply. And as soon as we click apply, we notice that there's a dialog box that comes up saying, do you want to run the full discovery as soon as possible? So this isn't going to wait, obviously, 3 hours to run on its next cycle. This will just perform the tasks immediately for us. And once this is done, is there some type of associated log file for this that we could go check?
Absolutely. But let's pretend right now we don't know what the name of that log file is. So we're going to show you another little trick here. What we can do is in the event that we don't know the log that's being written, we can open up the logs directory and sort by the modified date of the log. And by refreshing the screen, it'll show us new logs when they're created.
So we could just sort this here by the date modified, right? Mm-hmm. And then we should be able to now see the log. So just make sure I'm actually sorting this the right way. So I'm just going to press F5 here, and we can see that it's now sorted. And there's a log in here that's pretty current for us. It's called the AD forest discovery. So we were setting up some discovery methods for the forest. So logic would say that's probably what our log file is. And then we go ahead and we open this up, scroll down to the bottom of the log, and then we can actually see that it's finished its task, and it's going through and it's finding a certain amount of sites and subnets and information that's it's actually building as part of Configuration Manager. So there's some really handy information in here. Once again, we're just looking at the bottom to make sure that the actual tasks and jobs are complete, because from what we saw inside of the GUI interface was simply apply, run the discovery. There's no information that says that it's actually complete. So this is really our only way in Configuration Manager to know what's going on in behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go back to our Configuration Manager console here, and the next one that we're going to enable is something called Active Directory System Discovery, and this one here is probably one of the more important ones for people to understand. So before we enable this, Emile, can you maybe take a moment and just explain what Active Directory System Discovery is going to do for us?
Sure. So System Discovery is going to go out and pull Active Directory, whatever containers or even the top level if you select it. It's going to go through Active Directory, look at the systems that have been created in there, and then if it's an applicable system, it'll actually add it into Configuration Manager as a system resource. We have some options around here as to how we configure this. We can set things like only discover clients that have reset their password in the last 90 days. That's really good for getting stale records out of your Configuration Manager environment. What other options do we have in there? Password reset, I said. There's also updated their records. So if they haven't actually logged in and haven't authenticated Active Directory in the last, again, 90 days, we can take those machines and not include those in our discovery.
Perfect. So let's go ahead and let's enable this. We're just going to say Enable Active Directory System Discovery. And an important side note here is that anything that you do inside of Configuration Manager, especially the Configuration Manager console, is fully scriptable. So we could actually make all these changes with the PowerShell providers that are available for Configuration Manager if we so choose. For the purpose of the video, it's a little easier to actually show you in the GUI for the post-configuration tasks here. So all that we're going to do is we're just going to set a context now inside of Active Directory for where we want to actually search. And so for the purpose of the lab, where do we want to go? Do we want to just search for the objects that are inside of the ViaMonstra workstations, Emile? Maybe limit this so it looks a little bit better like production?
Sure, and that'll keep any servers out of this environment for now.
Okay, perfect. And then do we have to worry about any of the permissions or just use the computer accounts that's associated with the site server for the lab?
No, the site server account is fine because all we need is read access to Active Directory.
Okay, sounds good. So we'll just go ahead and click OK. And how about the polling schedule here? Do we want to change the polling schedule in here?
I don't think so. We've got Delta Discovery there turned on, so what that's going to do is whenever a new account is added into that organizational unit, within 5 minutes or so, Configuration Manager will recognize that change and add the new resource in.
Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'm just going to click OK, and it says, do you want to run a full discovery as soon as possible? We'll go ahead and say yes, and then we'll go back to our good old logs directory here, and I'll refresh this. And which log are we going to be looking for here, Emile?
This one is called AD-SysDISC.
Oops, sorry guys, I clicked a little too fast there. So we want to look for our AD system discovery. All right, so there we go. I just sorted it by name, a little easier for us to find. We know that we can find it by date stamp as well. So this one's called the AD system discovery. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll scroll down. And what we should see after this is done is that it's actually found a certain number of objects for us here. So I can see this is a great example here. It says that there's a DDR. And Emile, what's a DDR?
A DDR is just a discovery data record.
Awesome. And so that's basically a record for this particular PC workstation. I guess it's an AD computer account in this instance. And what that's going to be, what's going to happen here is that record is going to be bound into the Configuration Manager SQL database, and that's going to be the entity that we're going to be able to use for managing that object from this point forward. So we really don't use the Active Directory account per se, except for taking in the initial synchronization. Then we take and we basically pull this over into our SQL database for Configuration Manager. We still update based on the AD object, but this is the new object that's created now in the Configuration Manager database.
Right, and it's not just going to pull in the computer name of a resource here. You have the full leverage of Active Directory to your powers. So it's going to pull in by default, I think 20 or 25 different attributes that are stored with that record inside of Active Directory. And all of these records all these attributes that it pulls in associated with that computer account are things that we can use down the road to build collections on or run reports against.
Fantastic. So we can see under devices here that we've already started to have some of these devices pulling in for us. Okay, so Emile, my understanding with Configuration Manager is that once we start to see some of our devices showing up and our computers showing up inside of Configuration Manager, isn't Configuration Manager agent-based for all of its activities?
It most certainly is. And by default, client push is not enabled. So clients won't automatically get deployed. We've actually got to manually do this.
Okay, so we can see here that inside the console, I can see that it says client kind of equals no at this point in time. So I guess one of the things we can try is why don't we try to deploy the client from Configuration Manager and just see what happens in the log file. This is actually based on feedback we have coming from our customers. This is one of the most common misconfigurations we'll see in Configuration Manager, is that the accounts that are used to deploy the Configuration Manager agent, which is required on all of the clients that are going to be part of this Configuration Manager hierarchy, are not configured correctly. The password's expired or something like that's going on. So we want to show you a failure here just so that you can see some basic troubleshooting techniques. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to Device Collections. We're just going to double click on All Systems. This is going to take and this is going to just show us the All Systems collection. It just has all the members by default. I'm going to right click on PC001 and there's just an option in here that says Install Client. And seeing as we love log files so much, Emile, which log file would we use to go check and validate that this is actually working properly?
It's the Client Configuration Manager log or the CCM log.
Okay, perfect. So when we're going through the installation here, what options do we want to typically choose for client push, even although we know this is going to fail?
Well, for a new client, typically the only thing that I will do is the bottom option there to specify my site. And I mean, if you're running an environment with less than 100,000 clients, then you're typically only going to have one primary site. So all this does is enable the installation process to inject that site name and not require the client to have to go pull Active Directory for this name.
Okay, excellent. So what we're going to do is we're just going to actually try this install here, and we're just going to see what happens. So it looks like everything has succeeded here, correct? I click next. It looks like everything is fine. Whoa, we're a new configuration manager admin. Now we can sit there and wait and wait and wait. So if a failure occurs during this client push, how frequently does configuration manager go retry to deploy that package out to that particular client?
It'll try once an hour for the next 7 days.
Okay, so I sit in the console here. I press F5 to refresh. I go through and update my membership, and I still see my collection membership. I still see the clients no. So let's go back to our kind of theme that we have for this blogcast here, and let's go check the appropriate log file. So Emile told me that it's the ccm.log. So now we know if we're doing client pushes, this is going to be an important log file for us. And let's go see if we've got any error messages that are being generated for us taking and trying to connect. So we can see that it's trying to connect and bind into this machine, and it says no client installation account found. Oh, that's a problem for us. And then we can also see that we're starting to get a few failures here. So it says failed to connect to PC 0001 using the admin $share. So that's just the administrative share on all the machines. And this is a very common failure that we'll see in one of two instances. Number one, the client push account has not been configured, or number two, we could potentially have a firewall issue, or number three, we don't have administrative rights to that particular workstation. So there's really only three things to go through and check from this point forward. But as we can see right now, this is just not going to work. And so we see errors, and we see lots of errors, and it's not actually going to deploy our account, our agent for us here properly.
So is what's wrong? Well, basically, we just went over it, right? You need to have admin access to the machine in order to install the client, right? Because the process, what this does is when we initiate that install client step from inside the console, what it's going to do is it's going to connect into that admin share on the client. It's going to create a CCM setup folder. Inside that folder, it's going to copy one executable file down, and it's less than a meg in size. I think it's 200K or something. Once it gets that file on the computer, it's then going to initiate that file, which then triggers a subsequent download of the 180 megs worth of stuff that it needs to actually install that client. So anywhere along that way, permissions or access issues will cause this to fail.
Okay, so Emile, what were some of the things that we learned about in this first video, this first post-configuration, post-hydration video? Were there a few things that we actually had to take care of after the configuration in order so that we could use the lab properly?
Yeah, we still don't have the entire process scripted, so there are a couple of quick little manual steps that we need to go in through and do. We installed the reporting services point, and we started on getting items discovered inside a configuration manager.
Awesome. And so we've got a few things in there. We can see our PCs now. We set up our discovery. And so in the next video coming up, what we're going to focus on is the final post-configuration steps. We'll maybe configure that client push account. So we'll set an account. We'll make sure it's got some local admin rights on those workstations that we want to manage. And then we'll also show you in the next video how to take and how to create a firewall exclusion group policy, and so that we can actually talk to these machines properly. Because in our lab environments that we create, we want them to be as close to production as possible. So we'll typically leave the firewalls on servers and clients, because we want to make sure that we're not just disabling that as a quick workaround, or just giving people domain admins or service accounts domain admins and stuff like that. We want to make sure that we follow the kind of strictest rules for security and stuff like that. So I hope you've enjoyed our video, and we look forward to seeing you in the next broadcast.
Take care.